This video contains disturbing content. Viewer discretion is advised. Number 15. A tribe in Indonesia called the Toraja has a unique tradition regarding the dead called the Ma'nene Festival. Once a year, they unearth the corpses of their loved ones and engage in quality time. They dress the corpses up in new clothes, pose them, and take family photographs. After a few days of rituals, they return the corpses to their caskets, but not before they take every possible measure to ensure the corpses are preserved, so that they will be ready for many years of future Ma'nene festivals. Images from the Ma'nene festivals are truly shocking. Family members pose smiling for photos with corpses that are in various stages of decomposition. One image even features the corpse of a little girl with her living mother. Number 14. What you're looking at is American outlaw, thief, and murderer George Parrot. No, it's not Parrot's shoes you're looking at, but quite literally Parrot. Parrot, better known as Big Nose George, was such a hated criminal of the Wild West that the townspeople actually broke him out of jail only so that they could kill him themselves. Afterwards, doctors took possession of his body and desecrated it. His skull cap was removed so that his brain could be studied, and the cap was used as an ashtray. His skin was removed and sent to a tannery, where it was turned into a medical bag and a pair of shoes. But these shoes weren't just for show. One doctor actually wore the shoes to a celebration. It's suspected that Big Nose George wasn't the only criminal of the Wild West to suffer the fate of being turned into clothing. Number 13. It's possible to commit murder while sleepwalking, and there are numerous historical cases of sleepwalking being used as a legal defense. While many of these defenses have been thrown out by the jury, in some cases, people facing life in prison have been acquitted with the sleepwalking defense. In the case of Kenneth Parks, Parks drove 14 miles to the home of his in-laws. He bludgeoned his mother-in-law to death with a car tire and then attempted to kill his father-in-law. Immediately afterwards, he turned himself in to police, saying that he might have killed 2 people but couldn't remember. In court, it was determined that Parks had been sleepwalking during the whole incident and was found not guilty. Many found the verdict questionable. In 2009, Brian Thomas, husband of 40 years, was acquitted of strangling his wife to death on account of him sleepwalking. Thomas had an extensive history of night terrors dating back to his childhood. It was to such an extent that Thomas and his wife usually slept in separate rooms. On the night of the killing, the two were on a camping trip and were sharing a bed. Thomas was grief-stricken to the point of nearly killing himself, and members of his family vouched for his innocence. It's still not entirely clear what causes sleepwalking, and the connection between people's waking life and their violent sleepwalking habits is even more of a mystery. Number 12. The tongue-eating louse enters a fish's body through the gills, travels to the mouth, and begins sucking blood from the tongue so that it becomes necrotic and falls off. Leaving the fish tongueless might imply certain death, but for the louse, it's only the beginning. Though it looks like an underwater version of the common pillbug, this creature is actually a parasite. Once finished with the tongue, it takes the tongue's place. While of no benefit, the louse doesn't seem to harm the fish much beyond this point. It simply feeds off whatever the fish is eating. In fact, the louse becomes so dependent on the fish that its eyes actually shrivel over time, which some attribute to the louse no longer needing them to do its own hunting. When the fish does eventually die, the louse detaches. It's unclear what happens to it beyond this point. Number 11. Misfortune and tragedy have followed many of those in the Superman role. Kirk Allen, who played the first live-action Superman, was so closely identified with the character that he had a hard time getting other roles, but comparatively, he got off easy. George Reeves, star of Adventures of Superman, was found dead of a gunshot wound. The official cause of death was suicide, though some suspect he was murdered. He was only 45. Christopher Reeve, who played perhaps the most iconic version of the character, was paralyzed after a horse riding accident in 1995 and would die only 9 years later at age 52. Actors for characters such as Lois Lane and Jor-El have also suffered tragedies, as have many others involved with the Superman franchise. More recent Superman actors have seemingly been exempt from the curse. Henry Cavill was asked about the curse and openly stated that he didn't believe in it. Number 10. When prominent women in ancient Egypt died, the embalming process had to be treated specially. This was to prevent certain defilements of the corpse. The ancient physician Herodotus once wrote, quote, "Wives of notable men and women of great beauty and reputation are not at once given over to the embalmers, but only after they have been dead for 3 or 4 days. This is done that they may not have carnal intercourse with them, for it is said that one was found having intercourse with a woman newly dead." In ancient Egypt, this was a particularly heinous act, as death was not quite the end of a person's journey. It was the job of the embalmer to treat the body with care and ready it for passage into the afterlife. Number 9. While parents love sharing ultrasound pictures of their babies, they might not want to share the MRI picture. Else, family or friends might think there's an alien or demon growing inside of them. Using magnets instead of sound waves, the MRI creates a very different impression of the creature growing inside the womb. It certainly doesn't look cute or innocent, let alone human. In some cases, MRIs are used to scan for certain medical conditions ultrasounds can't detect. However, it's probably best if doctors keep these images to themselves. Number 8. There are many conspiracy theories about the assassination of 35th President John F. Kennedy. But one of those isn't about his missing brain. It's undisputed that Kennedy was buried without his brain. His brain isn't even in the National Archive or some museum. Theories about who stole the brain or why it was stolen often suggest it was to prevent examination. Unknown to the public, JFK often took many medications to combat physical ailments. It's also suspected that he suffered from depression and mania. As his brain might show signs of these issues, some suspect John's brother Robert Kennedy stole the brain as to preserve his brother's glamorous public image. Others say an analysis of the brain would have shown signs of a second or alternate shooter, confirming conspiracy theories that JFK's murder wasn't the act of a lone gunman, but part of an orchestrated plan. In this case, who would have stolen the brain depends on which theory you believe, as suspicions range from the CIA, the Mafia, the KGB, or even Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, as all of these organizations and individuals have been suspected in the Kennedy assassination. Number 7. You might joke that this gorilla's brain is malfunctioning, but that could be correct. Many zoo animals end up displaying bizarre, repetitive, and seemingly meaningless behaviors. Stereotypies are possibly the result of stresses caused by confinement. Without the ability or need to perform natural functions, the brain seems to form these behaviors to cope. Among these are spinning, pacing, oversleeping, swaying of the head, and excessive grooming. These can result in poor social adjustment and sometimes the animals mutilating themselves. Once developed, stereotypies often stay with an animal, even if they are returned to a natural environment. Stereotypies are also seen in humans, and often in those with autism, learning disabilities, and impaired sight. The exact cause for stereotypies in these cases is less clear. Number 6. For many, magazines in a checkout line at a grocery store might be a source of celebrity gossip, political rumors, and the latest dieting trends. On the darker side, you might expect to see stories of alien encounters or horrifying true crime stories. Magazines in the United Kingdom, such as That's Life and Pick Me Up, often contain headlines such as, "We found 3 dead bodies in Mom's bedroom," and "Nightmare neighbor was my rapist." Some might find these unsettling, especially when they are placed in the view of children, but they are preferable when compared to actual scenes of death. The Mexican magazine Alarma was known for its macabre cover photos, from brutal cartel crimes to traumatic traffic accidents to unearthed rotted corpses. Nothing was off limits for Alarma. It blatantly appealed to the basest forms of curiosity and entertainment. Some recall covers featuring these violent scenes side by side with lewd and sexual content. Originally established in 1963, Alarma was discontinued in 2014, but it was not the first or last of its kind. Such magazines often appear in poor and crime-ridden areas where many likely have no choice but to be desensitized to such violence. Number 5. William Halsted, one of the fathers of modern surgery, was also a cocaine addict. Halsted and his companions experimented on themselves to study the medical uses of cocaine, resulting in addictions. The conditions became so bad that outside of Halsted and one other, the whole group died, and it was under these conditions that Halsted developed his residency system. Halsted expected medical students in training to work for unprecedented hours. On the outside, it appeared as though he practiced what he preached, but many noticed he had bizarre behaviors. He'd isolate himself for long periods of time and would often leave students to complete surgeries. When he did conduct surgeries himself, the process was so slow that watchers actually became uncomfortable. He'd isolate himself more and more from the view of others and focused on contemplation and writing. Some of the writings he produced during this time have been described as incomprehensible. Only later it was learned that during this whole time he was a cocaine addict. In more recent years, one doctor stated that if Halsted were practicing today, he would probably be summarily fired from his position and lose his license to practice medicine. However, this didn't stop his model from becoming the standards that medical students are expected to live up to even to this day. As for Halsted, he did seek to end his cocaine addiction, but only ended up with an additional addiction to morphine. Number 4. In some cultures, young male children with exceptional singing voices would be castrated prior to puberty to retain their vocal range. In particular, parents would sometimes have this done if their livelihood depended on their boys singing. Being castrated at such a young age meant that these boys would develop very differently. They had longer limbs, never dealt with male pattern baldness, and of course, never developed coarse voices. The practice became common in the 16th century in Italy. By the 18th century, Castratos singing faded from public fashion, and thus did the surgical practice. Number 3. With all of the easy access to technology, some parents might worry about what kind of inappropriate content can be available within just a few clicks. While some might be suspicious about the internet or television, they probably would trust old-school singing and talking toys. Stuffed animals and toy instruments often offer children with educational lessons or just a fun companion. At least they're supposed to.
The rabbit and the frog. One day, a group of rabbits were together. They complained that they were timid and powerless. As threatened by people, dogs, and eagles, their lives were full of danger and fear. After their discussion, they decided to die because they didn't want to live in pain. Thus, all the rabbits ran to the pond together to kill themselves. At that time,
in 2020, an Australian woman posted this clip online, which tells the story of rabbits who believe ending their lives is the only reprieve from the constant stresses they live under. Needless to say, it didn't seem to be the toy's intent. Some speculated the story being recited originated from a Chinese fable, but was heavily mistranslated, and that it was probably intended for something else altogether, but somehow got in the toy. This isn't the first time a speaking toy had dark things to say. It happened with the Sesame Street character Elmo at least twice. The 2006 Potty Time Elmo book was supposedly trying to say, "Uh-oh, who has to go?" In 2008, the book was reissued with the line fixed, but Elmo was quickly threatening other children.
About this weekend, a mother changes the batteries on her son's talking Elmo doll and is stunned to hear what comes out of its mouth. You will be too.
Kill James? Kill James?
That's right. The Elmo doll is saying, "Kill James." That's the name of the boy who owns the Elmo Knows Your Name doll. You plug it into the computer so it will repeat the child's name. Well, the doll ran out of batteries, so the mom replaced them. That's when it started making death threats.
Kill James?
Whether these are defects or intentional alterations, most toys like this won't have these kinds of messages, but you'll never know when they'll pop up. Number 2. There are so many horrifying parasites in nature, but at least humans aren't the targets of these creatures. That is, unless it's something like the Botfly. These oversized flies, ranging from 0.4 to 0.7 inches long, implant their larvae inside the body of mammals. The creature's size should at least make it easy to spot and avoid, but the botfly is more inconspicuous than that. It tackles mosquitoes and attaches its eggs. As the mosquito drinks your blood, it unknowingly delivers the eggs. The eggs hatch into larvae, which burrow their way into the skin, with most of their body under the skin as they feed, and their rear staying out for breathing. The botfly leaves a red, irritated-looking lesion on the skin. While it may be unsightly, the larva generally doesn't cause life-threatening problems, though there can be localized pain and skin issues. A variety of methods can be used for removal, such as suffocating the larva, hence forcing it to loosen. If left untreated, it will purge itself from the body after 6 weeks to begin its pupal stage. This can result in a truly horrifying and surreal visual, as a worm or groups of worms, plump from feasting, emerge from your skin. Number 1. This passage is from a letter sent anonymously to police. They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. From 1918 to 1919, a serial killer kept the city of New Orleans in terror. The Axeman killed 6 people and injured 6 more. He consistently used an axe in his attacks. Even if the tool of murder was some other weapon, the Axeman would use an axe to further hack and disfigure the corpses. To this day, his identity is a mystery. Robbery never appeared to be the motive, as he never stole anything, except for sometimes using people's own axes in the attacks. Victims included the old, the young, men, women, business owners. A majority of the victims were Italian immigrants, but police were never able to confirm a racial motive. On March 13, 1919, a letter from the Axeman was published in the newspapers. He said that he'd kill again, 15 minutes after midnight on March 19th, unless his conditions were met. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. On the night of March 19th, jazz filled the streets of New Orleans. Dance halls were filled, and bands performed in houses. The Axeman kept his word, and at least for that night, no one was murdered. The serial killer held the city in the palm of his hand, yet remained completely anonymous. Later that year, he committed 2 more attacks and 1 more murder. After that, the Axeman never resurfaced.